And one thing we're focusing on is we want it to be legal for people to be able to repair these systems. Right now, it is called hacking. So if I buy a thermostat and they don't tell me that it is 5 years from now, if we figure out we're not making enough money, we can just turn this shit off so you buy another one. I want the ability to break into that thermostat because I bought it and be able to make it work the way that I want. I think you should be able to hack into your TV and not hack, but repair it. Make it so that I can connect when I want to connect. I should be able to use the Netflix app, but you shouldn't be able to see what I'm doing with my television. I want people to be able to reverse engineer what they bought and paid for. What I've always enjoyed is not necessarily repair, but it's what I get done with it. You know, people have always told you do what you're passionate about. And what I've noticed is everybody who tells you to do just live your passion, they're usually people who are already rich. What I enjoy is not necessarily repair. I enjoy helping people that wouldn't have been helped, solving a puzzle, and kicking a bully in the shins. And the reason that I really enjoyed working on Apple motherboards for as long as I did is I got to kind of do all those things at once. Somebody's telling you it's going to be $2,000 to fix this, and I show you it's $150 with a part that costs $5. I'm helping somebody that wouldn't have been helped. I'm solving a puzzle. And when somebody says, you must be authorized to do this, it's like, screw you. You should be able to fix your own hardware. And I think you should be empowered to know what you need to do to be able to fix your own stuff, or choose who can fix your own stuff. So I kind of got to do all three of those at once. And as time went on, my fight for right to repair, being able to fix what you own, really turned into just a small piece of, you don't actually own what you own. And as the years went on, I realized that this was not just something that affected me in my small niche, but it affected people everywhere. I showed up to this legislative hearing, I think in 2017 in Nebraska, and there were a bunch of farmers there. And I thought, I'm in the wrong room. And they started talking, and I think, wait, I'm not in the wrong room. It's just you have the exact same problem I do, except you're talking about a $700,000 combine and I'm talking about a consumer smartphone. And my people from my audience would send me emails, stuff they wanted me to go over the years. And as time went on, it would be this thermostat has become a subscription. This particular consumer product used to be a one-time license, and now they actually somehow managed to disable it. I didn't even know they had the ability to do that. And I didn't even know either. And as time went on, I realized that right to repair is a really tiny, small piece under the umbrella of ownership, which is slowly being eroded as time goes on.
Yes, exactly. And maybe there's a fair case to be made that I offer a service that's shitty and I offer you a product that's hard to repair. So from the perspective of the company, they are accounting for the benefit that they would have in the future. Of course, the problem is that the customer doesn't see that as clearly from the very beginning. They're not told transparently that you will have to face all of these costs. So from the perspective of the company, which might seem legitimate, you can do whatever you want with your products, and I will be, as a customer, the one deciding whether I still buy your products or not, accounting for the whole life cycle. But if you get into ecosystems like Apple or Microsoft, or so the big tech companies have whole ecosystems that create dependency. So at first it's very attractive because the product is subsidized partially by the benefit, by the huge profit that they are expecting to have with the repair of the machines that you buy from these companies. This is, my father happens to be a technician as well, and he has spent, no, he's retired, but he spent 4 years making technical repairs exactly like the ones you do live on YouTube. And I was talking with him before you came, and he made a very good point, which is exactly what I was mentioning, that they are expecting having a profit by repairing it themselves. And most of the times, if the gradient of wealth or GDP per capita is big enough between Switzerland and China, let's say, it's just not worth it to repair something. So at some point of enough development, and it's exactly what has happened in the last 4 years in Spain, because Spain went from being a relatively poor country when my father was starting to work, to now when he retired, being a relatively rich, incorporated into the European Union and very globalized country, where repairing things had a smaller of an edge. And I don't know if you face this in your life, but do you feel like as the world becomes more globalized and rich, the benefit to repairing something versus changing the whole motherboard or the whole machine, buy a new laptop, is there's a smaller hedge to be cashed by repairing? Do you feel that?
On a lot of devices, yeah. I mean, before I left to come here, I was fixing this stupid Qtelix headphone amp. I mean, this thing costs $70, and I spent 2 or 3 hours of my life on it, but I already have several companies. I was purely doing that because out of a spite for the company, because they had security. When I saw they had security torques, it's like, fuck you, I'm figuring this out. But secondly, because I also wanted it to work for the next day, and I was impulsive, and I really wanted it to work so I could listen to something on the airplane with my girlfriend, because you really can't buy a Y adapter for headphone splitters anywhere anymore. If I want to have a headphone out on my laptop and I want to have it split to 2, you can't buy that anywhere anymore. I guess nobody uses wired headphones anymore. So, but when it comes to other devices, I mean, there are motherboards that cost $1,500. If I can fix it for $400, I'm considerably cheaper. And if you can figure out how to do it in less than an hour, there's a real in there for somebody who has a high school level education to make a living wage. And yeah, you're right. There's a lot of things that are just fundamentally not worth fixing. I've gone to these fairs that tend to be a little bit more communistic kind of things. They're like these not maker fairs, they're like these repair cafes. And I'll see somebody bring a fan, and it's like a cooling fan. And to them, they spend an hour or 2 hours trying to fix this cooling fan that you could buy in Walmart for $13. And for them, it's for the fun of it. And I won't understand it because as a business person, I'm thinking of this in terms of what would a customer be willing to pay us to repair? How can I give my employees a living wage? Like one thing that I'm actually proud of is that if you park in front of my store, you'll see a Cadillac CT5V and a BMW 330i. These are not my cars of choice, but the fact that my employees can afford to purchase these cars, not buy them with debt, makes me proud. Like I'm happy about that, but I can't do that if you're fixing a fan. There are a lot of devices that are not devices that are economically viable to fix. But there are also a bunch of devices that are economically viable to be fixed. And the problem is not necessarily that the devices are not economically viable. There are always devices that are falling off the treadmill, but there's always new devices coming onto it. In the US, there are medical devices that cost over $100,000 where you'll have something like an Ethernet jack fall off of it and they just replace it. Or a power supply will die in something that costs $100,000. And it's worth it to replace the power supply. You know, the power supply, if fixing that, even if you can do it for a few $1,000s, you've saved the hospital a ton of money and you're also able to make some money yourself. Now, one thing you said is that some of the companies are assuming that they're going to be subsidizing the device they're giving you cheaply by the cost of repairs later. One thing that's interesting is Apple actually has said out loud, I don't believe this, but they've said that they don't make money off repairs. They claim they lose money off repairs. So if they're making tens of billions of dollars per year and they claim they lose money on repair, then they are actually making money upfront off of selling the product. And I have no problem with companies making money selling the product. What I have a problem with is when companies are not upfront with the ownership model being eroded. So one example, in California, which is considered one of the more lefty states in the United States, they ironically, they're actually one of the only states that actually has a law designed to protect property rights in the modern age. They don't enforce it at all, so I'm not giving them credit there. But I will give them credit for passing it. And it says that if you're selling a digital good, and that digital good is something that can be taken away at a later time, you cannot call that a purchase. You cannot say sell, sold, or own. You need to make clear that it is not a purchase, that it's not ownership. So for instance, let's say I sell a textbook, and I say you have a lifetime license. But it has to connect to the internet regularly, and if you're using an older operating system, it'll notice and not allow you to use it anymore. If I sell you a PDF file, I can say you own it. But if I'm selling you access to something, I can't use the word sell, sale, purchase, or own. And they made a law that I think makes sense, which is you need to advertise what you're selling somebody accurately. So this way the consumer can make an informed decision. Right now, consumers don't make informed decisions because they don't know any better. And the thing that'll bother me is that when I'll see people argue amongst themselves, like you're an idiot, I can't believe you bought a Nest, you're a moron, why'd you buy this car? But everybody has a blind spot. Everybody has areas where they're not a complete expert in that craft. And I understand that when somebody's buying a thermostat, they may not know that they just think the app connects to it. They don't think of the idea that it connects through a server that's going to get shut down at some point in time. My grandma has no idea how that works. She knows how she knows how a sewing machine works in ways that I don't, but she doesn't know how this stuff works. So most people have no idea when they're buying these products that they are designed to stop working at some point. And what we're trying to do with FUTO and the Consumer Rights Wiki is index every company that's ever made a product where they've disabled it or screwed customers over later, so that when you're on the website of that company, if you have a browser extension installed, which is totally free, it'll tell you, by the way, this company tried to make their thermostat into a subscription. By the way, this thing that was free, they tried to charge $117 a year as a subscription after going bankrupt. So this way consumers can at least decide for themselves if they want to buy product from companies that take part in that behavior. And nobody's really doing that right now.
Exactly. And I think this is more of a broader theme that you've discovered and come up with when you realize that you were in the right room with the farmers. Because in general, in every field, asymmetries of knowledge can be profited from. So if I'm offering you a service that you've got no idea how I handle it, and I'm able to make it even more difficult to know what I'm doing because I can put obfuscatory language in it so that no one knows really what I'm doing, but there's not depth in it. It's just someone feigning to have done something very deep. And I see this in every field, really, in law, in medicine, and what you're attempting to do is push back against that. Let's make everything transparent so that we know what we're dealing with. And when the transparency is there, the customer can make a good decision. So that's where I come to say that I think that this is tremendously relevant. It can be analogized to so many other things, that when there's transparency, decisions tend to be made better. If you make the feedback loop, the moment from which you make the purchase to the moment where you have the fuck up and you don't realize, oh, I have to now pay $400 for this thing that costed me 500. If that takes a long time, there's less learning. You have to go through much more time to learn the lesson. So the shorter you make that learning, because the pop-up comes from the extension in the browser that you are developing, and in a Wikipedia-like way, providing the information, which I find fascinating, that's exactly the right approach. I think it will make people have better alternatives, and when the economic weight is felt by the companies, because there's enough people doing this kind of stuff, long term, the companies will realize that we have to offer something better, because sheetifying things is not as profitable. People know that they have alternatives to some degree. And even if you only touch 30% of the market, there will be enough weight to move everyone in the right direction. So I think that the margin can really change the whole system.
Yeah, and one thing we're focusing on is we want it to be legal for people to be able to repair these systems. Right now it is called hacking. Some people will call it hacking. So for instance, in Norway, the CEO, I believe, of Future Home, they make these Internet of Things connected devices for your house, like thermostats that you can adjust from your phone and everything else. They went bankrupt. And when they brought the company back, they sent out a firmware update to all the devices that disabled certain functionality unless you paid $117 a year. So we put out a bounty and said, I'll give $5,000 to anybody who figures out a way around this so you can use Home Assistant or something else to control your stuff. And the CEO came out and said, this is considered illegal hacking. Now in Norway, that's not true. That is not illegal hacking. In the United States, it actually is. In the United States, if you bypass a digital lock or a technical protection measure to get access to a protected work, that is considered illegal. And there's a law that can get you put in prison for up to 3 to 5 years in federal prison for if you share that solution with others. I think that should be illegal. I don't even call it hacking. I call it repair. It's interesting because I showed a presentation I did. I showed a bunch of screenshots from Claude Code, and somebody had software that had DRM in it. And he said, oh, you told me that this was free. I'm confused. He didn't even say hack it. And Claude just spent 20 minutes going through every single digital lock, all the DRM, and just destroying. And it was going into memory and pulling out keys and everything. And it just made everything work. And at the end, it said, I've repaired it. I fixed it. It didn't say hack. It is like, if a clanker can get that this is repair, then surely we can as well. So I think that what we're working towards is I want it to be legal to be able to reverse engineer this. If I buy a thermostat and they don't tell me that it is like 5 years from now, if we figure out we're not making enough money, we can just turn this shit off so you buy another one. I want the ability to break into that thermostat because I bought it and be able to make it work the way that I want. And I don't think that should be illegal. And in the United States it is. And sadly, this one law, Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, has been exported to many other countries. They're even trying to get this added in Chile right now. It's crazy. Like, this law is almost 30 years old. And the thing is, a lot of these laws that govern this came out before your garage door connected to the internet, before your refrigerator connected to the internet, before your television connected to the internet. In 2001, Alex Jones was saying that your government is spying on you through your TV. In 2001, maybe he needed lorazepam or some schizophrenia medication. In 2026, there's nothing that he said is wrong in that particular context. Like, obviously, when he said it, it was a little crazy. But technically, in 2026, yes. They are spying on you through your television. It's a business model. Vizio has said that they make literally double the money. I think in 2021 to 2022, their profits were double off of their data business than it was off of their actual selling hardware business. So I think you should be able to hack into your TV and not hack, but repair it. Make it so that I can connect when I want to connect. I should be able to use the Netflix app, but you shouldn't be able to see what I'm doing with my television. I don't want the data on what I'm watching or what I'm doing readable. And if somebody wants to break into it and make it so that my television is my television, it shares my data with only the people that I wanted to share it with, that should be totally fine. I want people to be able to reverse engineer what they bought and paid for.
This is exactly why ad blocks are useful or are ethically acceptable, because the data harvesting advertising business model is, in my view, wrong. There's a much better business model, which is the subscription. This is something that Sam Harris has been transitioning towards as the years have gone. Well, he was always in a subscription model, but if you advertise to your customers, you have an interest in the things they do, and in installing cookies and doing all kinds of factory to get as much information from your customers as possible. But if you block all that shit and you don't provide the information to the trackers, and you disable all that, you make it so the business model starts to be less profitable. And all the attention that you had, you transfer into other places where profit starts to be doable. So if you stop paying with your information and you start paying with your cash, I think that's a much more legitimate way of, and transparent way. We go back into transparency. If you're charging me directly, saying this service costs $20 a month, then I'm willing to pay for it. No worries. But yeah, I have to know what I'm getting and I know what I'm paying with. But if you sneakily get all the data about my browser and my search history and the extensions I have installed, all of that information can be used to triangulate my behavior, to predict my next purchase, is in a conflict of interest because people have not deliberately gotten into that kind of transaction. And maybe the counterproductive law that exists in the US could be the operations that you would like to develop in your own business that you cannot in the US, unfortunately, could be to some degree overcome if you were able to do those operations in Norway with a partner in Norway who does those operations in the jurisdiction with the better law. Have you thought about that?
I have, but we're trying to make the point of how ridiculous this law is. So one thing that will happen is when we'll show up to Congress or we'll show up to a legislative office to talk about it, the opposition lobbyists will say that this is a solution in search of a problem that doesn't exist. I'm making it up. So then I would usually show up and say, okay, cool. So if I release this solution, you're not going to prosecute this guy? Are you willing to sign something that says that you are not going to prosecute him and that you're never going to seek it? Oh, you're not? Okay, then fuck off. So the way this works, for me, it's a win-win. So let's say we don't require when we release these bounties for any. So the bounty program, the way it works is people who watch the channel regularly and who interface with the organization will say, here's a company that's enshittified something, and we'll read through and we'll find the most egregious examples, and we'll release a bounty that says, if you come up with a solution, we'll pay you out. But we don't require that you release the solution publicly. Because I would never ask people to do something that's illegal. Of course not. So I can't control what people do on their own time, though. So some people release the solutions and some don't. If they do release the solution, a bunch of people are very happy and they get to see the benefits in the real time. Because there's two types of activism to me. There's the Greta Thunberg activism, the how dare you, and then there's the let me make your life better and have you share in my fun, right? And even though there's some points that she makes that I can agree with, she's just made it very easy to be turned into the how dare you thing. And I never want it to be like I'm lecturing you. I always want it to be watch what I'm doing, enjoy the board repair, make something work on your own. And then when you save $1,000, remember that this is how you did it. Remember the fun feeling you had, so that when you have a chance in your life to change things or make them better, you'll want to rather than feel like you were lectured to or hashtagged to or shamed into it. And what we're trying to do with that is if they release a solution and the solution works, hundreds of thousands of people are happy that their Nest thermostat works again. And if they don't release it, then I get to point to this law as a problem. And when we show up to members of Congress and the lobbyists for the opposition say this is not a problem, I can say, okay, cool, promise that none of these people are going to be prosecuted if they release the solution. And if you can't do that, then it is a problem. You're no longer able to have that line anymore. So for me, that's the way that bounty program has been working.
Have there been cases of people offering those solutions publicly and being prosecuted?
From the bounty program so far, no. So far, nobody's been prosecuted from the bounty program. In the past, there are people and I know Lexmark. I think Lexmark prosecuted a company that was making aftermarket ink. There was somebody that was jailbreaking an Xbox, and the judge was just livid at Microsoft throughout the entire case. There was Lexmark and Static Control was an interesting one. The thing is, there's not a lot of test cases for this right now because it's weird the way this works. So the way it works is there's this triennial exemption process every few years in the United States that you have to go through, and you have to beg the Library of Congress to be able to have this exemption for repair. So you're allowed to fix your own thing, but you can't show other people how to do it. So this result, it's kind of like you can do your own, it would be like saying you're allowed to cure your own cancer, but you can't work on anybody else's cancer. But how many people are oncologists? The exemption process right now is kind of useless. And also, a lot of people don't really want to risk the whole 3 to 5 years in federal prison thing, so they don't do it. So I want to get to a point where if you wanted your TV to be lobotomized or not spy on you, that there would just be every single repair shop would be willing to charge $50 to flash your television with something that somebody releases online. But nobody really releases that type of stuff publicly because they don't want to get in trouble. Or they do, but they release it from another country and anonymously. And it's usually a mess like that.
Yeah, this is using the government to counter the open source movement. You're creating a law that prohibits people from openly sharing the stuff. I think at some point the weight will be so big, and there will be so many solutions in the market that cannot be accessed because they're privately held. The people were not willing to share them because they were fearing the prosecution. This is one of the ways in which it can go. And if they stop prosecuting the people who which in your case there hasn't been a single example from your bounty program, but I think you're absolutely right. Whichever way it goes, if you keep finding new solutions to enshittification, and those don't get to the market because the people don't want to share them, then there will be enough pressure in the market of many people knowing that those solutions exist, but they are not getting to you because the regulator says so. And if they can share it, then the law will have to be changed at some point, because it doesn't make sense to have a law which is not applied. So we have to take that back.
Yeah, and a lot of it is that the law itself is so difficult. It's very difficult to tell when it applies. That there are arguments that are made that there are people that make the argument that because you can't even tell when you're breaking a digital lock versus just reverse engineering something, if you can't even tell when it should apply, then it shouldn't be a law. And I would tend to agree with those people.
Yes, but unfortunately, like in every other field, people who have access to Congress and to the regulators end up moving the regulation in the direction that benefits them. And in many cases, like in this one, it's parasitic. You're making a lot of people lose a lot for you to gain very little, and in a way that's not transparent. So it's a kind of parasitic relationship that these companies get into by lobbying the government into regulating all of these things, accessing this information away from their hands. And what has to be done is exactly the bottom-up approach that you're building that allows many people to know that this is going on. So many of the problems that people are having, and in a couple of your videos you mentioned that people don't really give relevance to this until they face it personally. But if they know how many of the things that they could be using are facing this enshittification, and little by little, even everyone will face this kind of bad treatment from companies. But I was going to the fact that if you make it more common knowledge that this process is happening, and in all the ways in which they are fucking with the product that you were trying to keep on your own property, then the pressure will be big enough to make a difference. And you are, I think, using the right approach. You're fighting this problem at all the levels, at the governmental level, at the practical level, at your repair shop. I haven't met many people who have been able to so coherently apply one philosophy at every level of their life. I'm very surprised.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed about this is that the right to repair itself gets seen as a progressive movement because you're asking the government to come up with a new rule or a new regulation. But what I find funny is that the people that will show up and say, we're against this, we don't want the government involved, we're very libertarian, we want the government to be hands-off for innovation, is I say, okay, cool, how about we delete Section 12.1 of the DMCA? Let's get rid of that regulation. Like, no, that's not what we meant. And it's very annoying to me how the people that pretend that they are hardcore libertarian, the moment I say, let's make it so breaking a digital lock or reverse engineering is no longer punishable by federal prison, will say, no, we need that. It's like, it's one or the other. You know, have you ever read Stephen Kinsella has a good book about, I believe it was a paper, it was at 100 or 150 pages on intellectual property. And he makes all these arguments as to on why intellectual property or why patent law in and of itself is a little bit too far and how it actually hurts innovation and how we had innovation before that. There are some elements of that book that I agree with. You know, why is it that this math equation is not patentable, but this little thing that I did with a math equation is patentable? There's a lot of ways that innovation is limited. And I think that when you say you cannot, there was this one argument, you familiar with the movement Stop Killing Games?
No.
It's been getting it's much more popular in Europe because that's where the initiative was being created. But this one guy, Ross Scott, just got tired of the fact that games that he purchased just stopped working. And I get it. On page 89 of the end user license agreement, it says I don't own the game. They're like, fuck you. When you were a kid, you bought a game and you can still play the game 10 or 20 or 30 years later if your cartridge or your CD is still good. And even if it isn't, somebody has a pirated ROM out there. And my Final Fantasy discs from 1999 no longer work, but somebody out there has a RIP, which I used because I can't buy the game. I couldn't buy the game when I found it. And I like what they're pushing for is a rule that says that that certain games, if they're sold as a purchase, they have to keep working after the servers are shut down. Like, how you come up with the way to make it work is on you, but just make a way for the games to actually work when the servers are shut down. Those things are gaining in popularity because people are sick and tired of not owning what they bought and paid for.
And there would be very cheap ways of doing that. If you just allow people to know, if you have the information of the actual game, because it's a few kilobits in the case of the old games, or very few megabytes in the case of later games. But if you just allow everyone to have the information of what the data is, and you can run it anywhere, then you're already providing with that requisite of selling your games. That you should allow your customers to keep using this game decades from now, whenever you shut down your product. Yeah. But that's inherent in the form that you sell it. If you're already offering people the ability to run it anywhere.
And even if you don't force the company to do it, Aaron at FUTO had a good point. He's the one who started and helped me with a lot of the initiatives that I'm working on now. And he's trying to show that you can do open source, or I shouldn't even say open source, but just like source of software in a more ethical way without screwing people. But you can be a capitalist while doing it. One of his points, which I think is great, is like, look at World of Warcraft. There was a hack that came out so that you could keep playing it and wound up being better than the original one from Blizzard. I forget if that's the exact game, but I know that he was talking about a few games where the hacked versions were actually better. And you should just allow people to do that. Like, what they did should be okay. If you're not supporting this particular game anymore and people still want to play it, you should be able to reverse engineer it and release it. Even if you're not forcing the company to do it, because his point is, I think that the way the EU tries to do things a lot is like force the company to do something a certain way. And I understand why they do that. But what if you also just allowed people to come out with their own way to do things? Now I got to my point. Okay, with the Stop Killing Games thing, I completely blanked at one of the points. My bad. So the Stop Killing Games initiative was about making it so that when a company's games no longer work, or like when they turn off the server, the game still works. And they were saying that this would harm innovation if you forced companies to make it so the game still works when it's over. And one of the counter arguments to this was, no, it's the opposite. They would be forced to make better games. If you have to make a game that's better than the old one, if I can still play Super Mario Kart, the new game has to be better than the old Super Mario Kart, or I'm not going to buy it. So their point was, the game, they said, well, this is going to hurt innovation because it's going to take us longer to make the games so that they last. And consumers' point was, no, if I can still keep playing my old game, you actually have to make a game that's worth playing. You can't just keep making the same game over and over again because you turned off the old one.
Exactly. I'm simultaneously preparing an essay with Michel Baldring, the author of Against Intellectual Monopoly, and we had a call last month, and we talked precisely about this, that all the presuppositions that say that you're going to hurt innovation when you take back the patents and the copyright are actually wrong. Most of the times, and there's plenty of historical coverage that he has given in his book, many cases in which the people who have gotten a patent have actually reduced their level of innovation substantially. You have a very bright inventor who is very knowledgeable of electronics and everything, getting into the new invention of a new tool. But because there's a patent there, then the incentive to innovate further, the marginal benefit to innovating is very small, and the marginal benefit to lobbying and prosecuting you for using it is massive.
I have to show you something very funny on the subject line. Okay, I don't know how it works in your country. I'm not fully familiar with Switzerland. Tell me the difference between this wireless microphone transmitter and this wireless microphone transmitter. So this one has an SD card. It allows me to record directly to the transmitter. So let's say that there's an issue in the transmission or a wireless issue. I have a recorded copy over here. This one costs just as much money and does not have that feature. Why does this one not have that feature?
I'm clueless. I don't know.
Because about 20 years ago, a company called Zaxcom filed a patent on recording and transmitting at the same time. So you can record, like on that little Zoom recorder. You can wirelessly transmit on this, but a device that wirelessly records and transmits at the same time, that was an innovation. And the gentleman that came up with it actually patented that, and it worked. So now what many people do, and what I did in a video, is I use this little clip, and I clipped this to a recorder. So now I have a recorder and a transmitter at the same time. Now, you can just connect a little headphone jack between the recorder and that to do that. There was a recorder company that advertised that you could attach it to the recorder using the line output. They had pulled that from stores just because they advertised it as having that ability. So when you go down the rabbit hole of just how restrictive things are with patents, like record and transmit at the same time. This is like, imagine patenting chewing gum and walking at the same time. That's essentially what you've done.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think of the name of Glenn Sanders at Zaxcom. I'll always remember that name. But Yeah, I mean, I did a video where I attached this to this. I attached the recorder to that. And it actually kind of looked like a little man who was talking and like, I've beaten your packing gun, Sanders. But yeah, when you look at the things that you are allowed to patent in the United States, it's kind of crazy. Like, there are things that are genuine innovations, and then there's just stuff like, I didn't know I could walk and chew gum at the same time. You mean I could do both? And somebody patented that. So if you look, there are all these companies that come out with these weird shapes for things to be able to do this, because you're not allowed to sell a body pack transmitter that has a micro SD card slot in it for recording. Like, that's the most...
What is the strong case to be made for copyright or patents?
The strongest case to be made for patents is that you should be allowed to, if you came up with a genuinely great idea, how are you going to be able to make money off of it if the first one costs 10 million and the second one costs 50 cents? Like that, and that's the hard thing. Except the only thing is, like, the first one didn't cost 10 million. Like, this is, you combined a recorder and a transmitter into the same body. That's not genius. I don't know why somebody didn't think of it before then, but they didn't. And there's a lot of cases where the first one did not cost 10 million. But what I would say my counter to that is, if you look at it, there's a lot of people and there's a lot of companies where people are willing to pay for the person who came out first or who came out with a brand. How many people trust brand names when the store brand is just as good? Like, how many people buy Procter and Gamble brands of soap instead of the store brand of dish soap when it's the same chemical? I mean, like, even I'm an example. I hate to use it as this, but like, people already know this by now. How many people pay me for a border pair of data recovery when somebody on eBay is maybe sometimes just as good, but half the price? Like, I'm not trying to rip people off. I'm happy about being able to pay people decent wages at my company. But if you're honest and you're good at what you do, a lot of the times people don't just sort by lowest price and go for the lowest. A lot of the times people will actively choose to pay more money for the same thing. And if you think that's not true, just look at lots of different jewelry, look at lots of different clothing brands where people are going to Banana Republic to pay $40 for a shirt that they could get $5 elsewhere, and it's made in the exact same place. And I think it's not necessarily about the idea. Everybody thinks it's about the idea. I think a lot of it is about the implementation of your idea, whether or not you're going to be successful. So if you actually come out with something and you've done a good job of it, I don't think a patent protection is necessary for you to be successful.
And many of the cases, the innovation stops. Right after you get the patent, people start lobbying and prosecuting the competitors for using it. So it converts the mind of someone who's productive into a parasite.
Yeah. And the other thing is that one of the things the reasons that I would never file patents is the same reason that I don't ask my employees to sign a non-compete in my company. Like, it's when you have your employees sign non-competes, you don't have to treat them as well. When you force your customers to buy from you, you don't have to treat them as well. Yep. And I think that if you have no competition, you fundamentally don't have to treat people as well. How much money do you think the company that patented this charges for a single channel of microphone, transmitter, and recording at the same time?
For one device or for producing the device?
Just for one.
$20.
More than so, like, this is, I think, like $300 a channel or something like that, $300 to $600. The other companies is like $2,000 to $4,000 a channel, and for the same thing. Like, they don't have to treat their customers as well in that situation because they have a monopoly on that particular product or service.
Exactly. If you don't have an alternative, you're badly treated.
Yeah. Or in this case, they treat the high-end customers very well. They just don't have a low-end customer because they don't have to care. Like, there's no competition. I have to figure out a way to belt this to myself. Good luck with that. I think that when companies don't have competition, that they don't have to treat people as well. So, like, I'm against any sort of thing like that. A law that says you cannot reverse engineer, I'm against it. But I'm also against contracts that say that you're not allowed to compete after you quit. Like, my employees should always believe that they can go somewhere else. It ensures that I keep my company running well. It forces me to be a decent boss in the back of my head. And even with capitalism, it's like, I love capitalism. The way I stole a lot of the people that I had in the early days of my company, where I used to sell parts instead of just do repairs. And I would visit other companies. I would see, wait, why are you asking for the chips? You know how to fix the board by themselves? And you get $13 an hour? I'll give you 30. Like, that kind of thing back and forth is how I got a lot of my employees. Capitalism. Like, you're underpaying people. Okay, cool. You deserve all the training you did to those people. You just, now I get it. And I wouldn't have gotten it if you weren't greedy. So it's like it goes both ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that you should be able to reverse engineer any of these products that you have so that you're allowed to get back access to what you bought and paid for. It forces the company to try and treat you better.
Everything corrects if enough time has passed or if the fuck up is big enough. So in the case that you were mentioning, if the employee was getting paid little enough and then they did that for decades, and then their children learned that doing that specific thing there was not a good idea. They would learn that maybe in some other place they could get paid more or doing some other thing. But the arbitrage that you did, paying those people more because there was still a huge margin to be had by having those people getting paid a normal living wage while also having a profit in the business, because what they're doing is pretty valuable. And if there's too big of a profit to be made from their labor, then more capital will come into the market and attract that profit. So they were having a profit of, let's say, $100 an hour, and then now you're having a profit of 50. That reduction in the profit makes you more competitive because the workers are willing to come with you. But if there was no competition and they had an actual monopoly, then the time it would take for the system to correct itself would be much more, and it would never be corrected fully because those regulations, those non-compete agreements would be there. And if we decrease the time frame in which this kind of thing gets figured out and everything becomes more transparent, then people will generally behave in a more functional and fair way.
Yeah, I think bosses behave better. I think companies behave better. I think people behave better when there's competition. Like, I can't treat my girlfriend like shit. She can go somewhere else. Yeah. Like that's the point.
Yeah, she could find plenty of other men to be with.
If it said in page 89 of the end user license agreement, like, you can't be with any man but Louis Rossmann, maybe I'd be more of an asshole. I don't know.
Yeah.
Human beings tend to become assholes when they realize that there's no consequences for shitty behavior.
Exactly. And this reminds me to a libertarian phrase that there is. What makes the difference between rape and sex? Consent. What makes the difference between robbery and giving something to someone? Consent. What makes the difference between taxes and robbery? Nothing. There's no consent. So maybe the same thing that can be applied to many other cases in personal interactions, that one-to-one level of analysis where our brains are developed to handle these situations, we see it clearly. If I force you to do something, that's immoral. But if you're forced at another level of analysis, at corporate or governmental level, then people suddenly don't have a problem with that. But I think we should be coherent and apply the same principles across all scales.
I think the reason that libertarianism is not as popular as it could be is because when they say it's consensual, it was a contract, when you have a 150-page end-user license agreement, and it's like, it's page 89 to get my refrigerator. I'll give you a good example of this. LG refrigerators. Do they sell LG refrigerators in Switzerland?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool. So in the United States, there's something called forced arbitration. I'm not sure if that's illegal here. It means that if you want to sue somebody, like you can usually sue a company or a class action lawsuit if something horrible happens. Let's say that the company has a 5-year warranty. All their refrigerators die within 2 years, and they just say, fuck you, they're not covering you under the warranty. Enough people can get together and then sue the company. Forced arbitration means that instead of going to court, you're forced to go through a third-party arbitrator. And the third-party arbitrator is determined by the company. So it's kind of like me deciding the referee, or it would be like, let's say we're getting a divorce. I get to hire the lawyer that represents myself and my ex-wife in the divorce, and wow, I got a really great deal. It's the company being able to do that. Now, they claimed that there's a forced arbitration agreement that you signed when you got the refrigerator. And everybody was saying, no, I didn't. And they said, no, it's in the box. I said, what are you talking about? I never saw the box. When you go to the store, there's no box. When you get the refrigerator delivered, you have to sign that says that you got it delivered. And what they do is, because the box is too large for it to fit through the door, they take the refrigerator out of the box. You never actually physically see the box. You see a delivery person with a fridge that's out of the box and a thing that says sign saying that you got the fridge. And they said, no, you signed the forced arbitration agreement when you got the refrigerator. So technically you signed the contract. And like, once enough of those things happen, you just get people that say, I'm just going to flip over the table of society, fuck all of this. And while I understand the concept of consented, well, you shouldn't sign up for agreements that you don't like, there's only so far you can go with a 150 or 200-page agreement for every single thing you do in your life. It is not practical to read all these things. And or when people, like, I think sometimes I'll get comments saying, well, no, you actually do like these things because you use them. And it's like, well, the alternative is to not use it. It's okay. So the alternative is to find myself a car from 1970, a rotary phone, to live completely off the grid. And you can go down the rabbit hole and do this. I've gone down the rabbit hole with I wrote a 900-page guide on how to remove Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, and everybody else from your life. If you really want to live completely off the grid, like you did in 1970, like, you can do that. And they'll say, well, yeah, you see, you can do that. That's a choice. You're choosing to do these things. And like, I think the libertarians lose is when they say, no, you chose this. The market chose this. And I don't think that there's I understand the principle of these companies are what you're paying for. Nobody else has come up with something better. Therefore, this is what won. But there's no idea for maybe something else would have, how about this? Sometimes I think there's too much faith put into the idea that, well, this happened, therefore this is exactly what people wanted. And I think like it's possible to say that I don't want government coercion at the same time saying, yeah, this stuff is kind of fucked up. And I think that like a lot of the hardcore libertarians, when they actually go full autistically into, no, you want this. You want a device that's locked down. No, you want your thermostat to be a subscription because you didn't buy this one. It's like, well, most people don't even know when they're buying these things what they're getting. Well, no, you would have read it if you wanted to know. Well, yeah, I work 10 hours a day and I go to school and I have a life. And like a lot of that doesn't get entered into it. And it will frustrate me. There are some like really cool libertarians like Larry Sharp. He keeps running for governor in New York City. I mean, and he lives in New York City. He keeps running for governor of the state. And he's very practical with the solutions that he comes up with. Like instead of focusing on let's get rid of the DMV, let's not require a driver's license to drive, and let's get weed, he'll focus on, it seems like we're really wasting a lot of money on things like senior year of high school where people don't do anything but smoke weed in the stairwell. What if instead of wasting that money there, we spent it on trade schools because we don't have any plumbers? Like, that's cool. But a lot of the libertarians that I will meet will say people want this. And if they wanted something else, they would have paid for something else. But like they don't have the they don't make space for the idea that something else wasn't there at the time, and that when they signed up for this, they didn't realize what they were signing up for was signing their life away. And then they'll say, well, those people are stupid. And it's like, oh, well, okay, fine, maybe, but good luck getting more than 1% of the vote with that.
We're all stupid to some degree. I don't have the bandwidth to read 200 pages for everything I do. So in that sense, am I stupid? Yes, because I just don't have the ability to read 200 pages for every single thing I do in my life. So we are all stupid. We have to make things more accessible for everyone. And I think that the criticism that you get from from some of the libertarians is wrong because they are not realizing that the problem comes with scale most of the times. If a corporation becomes big enough, the dysfunctions of a miscalculation economically, that you don't know where you're getting profit or losses from, the feedback from the customers, you don't get it as well. And because you have a budget of billions of dollars, you don't care about having a loss of a couple million here in 1 year or in a decade, really. So I think that the libertarians should be more aware, and this is maybe somewhere where both the left and the right can converge, which is exactly what you're doing, because your movement of right to repair is attractive for everyone in the political spectrum. I haven't seen this many times, but this is the direction I wanted to take this on. The libertarians should realize that the big corporations are creating the same kind of economic miscalculation that they criticize Hayek, Mises, Rothbard, all of these libertarian thinkers. We're talking about the impossibility of socialism, about the fact that when a government becomes big enough, they cannot calculate so that their malinvestment goes up exponentially. The same thing happens at the level of the corporation. If it's big enough, it doesn't. It's like if you're 50 meters long, you don't feel your feet as well because it's too far from your brain. So the same thing happens at the level of corporations. And if libertarians realize this, I think we would get a very strong ally and some less of I hate it when we have left-leaning people who would be fairly rational and capable of thinking about this stuff, and they care about this, have them completely separate from this topic, or I don't know how you would call it, but they hear the libertarians making this kind of argument, which is bullshit, exactly what you were saying. Oh no, but you want it. You want a thermostat, a subscription for your thermostat. Do I really want it? I'm realizing now that I don't want it. That's why I'm trying to figure out a solution. So the market is, okay, let's take the logic of the market all the way through. Don't you realize that the market is now realizing that the thermostat with a subscription is shit, and that's why I'm reducing my demand? Don't you think that the market is constantly adapting to whatever information is allowed to be in the market? So of course we would have to adapt this. And I think that having the left-leaning, more progressive types completely hate this debate because we have some people in the other side making crazy arguments is very counterproductive, and we should get everyone in the whole spectrum to realize that there's something for everyone.
Yeah, I forget who said this. I'm paraphrasing, so I don't want to take credit for what somebody else said. But I remember somebody making this point of, like, let's say you landed on an island, like two people land on an island, the plane crashes, one person wakes up a few hours before the other person does, and like he collects all the coconuts, and then like the person wakes up, they have no food, they have no water, they have no nothing, and the person who got everything walks up to them and says, "You can have any of my coconuts and water you want. All you have to do is suck my dick." And like, is that coercion or is that voluntary? And it's like, I lived in New York City long enough to be able to say that my government is very, very stupid, and a lot of the authority they have, maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should get a lot less money. And I think part of what made me more libertarian leaning in my younger years was being radicalized by dealing with one of the stupidest governments on planet Earth. And I've recorded many of my dealings with them so other people could see that I'm not crazy. But there's also, what bothers me is when people can't acknowledge when like there are holes where their philosophy or their way of seeing the world just doesn't explain something. And when I'll see in my comments, well, you chose a car that does this. You wanted this because you spent money on it. It's like, well, no, I didn't want it. It was what was available at the time. No, you could have just went without it. You could have just not driven. Or you could have just not bought a camera. You could have not bought this, that, and the other. And I think their point is these items exist, but the company that made them also made them with this. And if you want it, well, you could just make another company. Why don't you make your own Apple computer? Why don't you make your own this? And I don't think that they realize that the difficulty involved in doing that, the chance that goes into whether or not you'll be successful in these endeavors. And like, it's just hard to admit, yeah, it's difficult to, how about this? It's difficult to find people, it's difficult to be in the standpoint of defending a company taking away ownership rights and saying, yeah, it's because you wanted it. And like, I wish they could just say, okay, yeah, point taken, you got me there. Because like, there's no philosophy that you can be completely 100% consistent in without like warping your brain to some extent. I mean, when you're defending General Motors and Ford and everybody else, taking your data, selling it to LexisNexis behind your back, and then giving it to your insurance company, who then raises your rates based on how you're driving. And I see this in my comment section regularly. And like, yeah, they chose that by buying that car. Like, where did they say that? But where did the company say they were doing that? That stuff just enrages me. And I'll see people like constantly fight amongst themselves instead of just say, we should band together and to say, fuck this one company. And I understand if they say the government is not the vehicle by which to do that, and point taken. But I think the reason that stuff bothers me is because they lose so many people that may actually be open to every other portion of your ideology.
But the mistreatment that people are getting, the thing that the expectation from these people that were making the case that you wanted it, was coming from a place of knowing that you don't have too many alternatives. And maybe this is not the case because you have plenty of other cars, and maybe it was just an asymmetry of knowledge, that you didn't know that those cars with better features existed. But I think we could get everyone to agree on the fact that if we have better alternatives and those alternatives are known, then less people are going to be hurt with the bad treatment from the companies who offer the shitty service from this car who analyzes how you drive. But on the other hand, of course they should be allowed to offer whatever service they want, and if they will be judged by the market in whichever way. If you start offering horrible repair services, then people will stop coming to your shop. But you should be free to offer whatever you want. If you want to put your whole reputation behind a bad business, then that's your capital, that's your reputation, you can go with it. But what I have a problem with is the obfuscation of the information, that you don't let people know that you're going to offer that shitty service. Not in your case. I think there's nothing to criticize from your business, but from the car that we were talking about before. If you don't know people know that, and you hide it behind 200 pages that no one is going to read, because no one has the time to do that, except the 0.1% of the population who are lawyers who dedicate their life to that, you are making things in a way that if you faced personally, so let's say the guy in the corporation, the lawyer in the corporation who designed those things, if I went to his life and made him whatever he's going to be up to. So the toilet you're about to use, you have to sign this contract of 200 pages where you say that if you make anything in any way some more dirty than we are expecting, you'll have to pay $20,000. We could give the same medicine to the people doing this kind of shit, and then they would realize, oh no, this doesn't make sense. So I think taking everything to the scale of humans and away from the abstraction of corporations would be very useful. But of course, we need the cost. We need the bigger scale to do different things. There's economies of scale. So this argument is very nuanced and multifaceted, in my view.
Yeah, my goal is to get people to, instead of think of it from like a left or right or libertarian standpoint, is to try and figure out how to make arguments that appeal to everybody with it. Everybody wants to be able to own what they bought and paid for. I think at the very least, if a company is acting poorly and a government is not going to do anything about it, that you should be able to just hack and get around every piece of DRM to make their stuff work again without there being any sort of restriction.
Exactly. And the alternative that is always proposed is bankrupt at every level. Ideologically, so theoretically, it's wrong, and Michel Baldwin proved that. Practically, we can do it. You prove that with your repair shop. And legally, it's in the process of disappearing. And it's already not the case in many places. So I think this multifaceted law, actual technical side, and the theoretical side, if we attack this problem at the three levels, this is the way we will win. And if people who has a platform like you who can incentivize people and let everyone know about this being a problem, and they're incentivized later to contribute voluntarily, like in a decentralized Wikipedia-like way of we're going to contribute in whichever way I can. I'm going to write this part of this article, documenting this specific problem of this product, and so someone else can have their life a bit easier next time when they face the same problem. I think this is exactly the same way. You mentioned in one of your videos that an ant cannot move a rock, but the whole nest of the whole collective of the ants can move it. So I think this is what should be channeled. And the Swiss audience that we have at Trust and Monad are exactly the people who I'm going to try to make the case that these people should also be interested in your initiative. The FUTO is a huge of a project that has a lot of value behind it, and people should be paying attention to this.
Yeah, because I think especially people on the right, well, let's say that they are not necessarily for legislation that says or like right to repair legislation or anything that would impede what a company is allowed to do or have the freedom to do. I try to get to them with, well, that whole saying you will own nothing and be happy is something that's trending more and more, at least on the American right, and like something that I can poke at. And you remember what it was like to have property rights. A lot of people who are on the right tend to be the farmers or tend to be the people that are used to maintaining their own stuff, and that is very popular with them. So I've tried to, like, with them, I'll talk about that. With progressives, I'll talk about big businesses and how the big businesses are screwing people over. With libertarian types, I'll say, why should it be illegal to reverse engineer something that you bought and paid for? Mm-hmm. I try to make arguments so that to each different group of people that are universal, because most people just don't like having their stuff being taken away. And one of my questions for you is, I mostly talk about American products and services and cars and businesses. Like, where have you experienced this in Switzerland with the stuff that you buy and pay for?
Well, I happen to have been a long-time user of a podcasting streaming app, and throughout the years, the rates had the premium subscription, and it went from 12 euros a year to 40 now, or around 40, because they charged me twice. I don't know why, the 20 euros. So I think that they've been spiking up their prices, and the value-added service that they were providing is very small. And of course, the code is closed source. It was never open source, so that's on my side. But I've had this experience in multiple cases, and because I'm a fan of podcasts and I've been listening to podcasts for many years, I have a couple thousand hours of podcasts of a history I have in this podcast app, and I'm now using an open source one, AntennaPod, because the service that they were providing, the value added of the premium subscription was always the same. There were some features that I appreciated personally, but they were adding so many other things that I didn't need. I didn't buy into this.
What was the price of using the open source software for you?
0.
I don't mean money. I mean, like, I'll give you an example. When I switched over from using Google for everything to using, let's say, Nextcloud for contacts and notes, there was an update to Nextcloud, and when I made the update, it set it up so that contacts, I think, were read-only instead of read-write. So I had saved a contact to my phone. This is funny. This actually may have saved my life, because this could have been, for all I know, it could have been the worst date of my life. But I asked somebody for their number, and she puts it in my phone. And when Nextcloud server updated, it was set to read-only. And when I turned my VPN on, which connected to my home server, because it was set to read-only, and it was saved to the Nextcloud contact to go on my server instead of on my phone, the number disappeared. Now, maybe Nextcloud was trying to save me from a horrible date. Maybe it knew better than I did. But there are a lot of random little bugs in open source software. And one of the things that Aaron would always mention at FUTO is there's so much stuff with open source software where they do 75% of the work, but the additional 20% required to polish things and really make it so your grandma will use it. Like, once you had the dopamine hit of, wow, the software kind of works, a lot of the times developers, when there's not a financial motive or I need to do this to pay my bills, they will stop doing the rest of the work to make it good enough that most of the population will use it. So it works, but it's like it works. So what were some of the challenges you faced when you switched over? Or was it just a seamless experience where it was like, wow, this is actually better than the one I was paying for?
So I have a grid of the podcast, and that the feature of modifying the location is not added, so I cannot just modify them in the same order I had before. So now they are alphabetically ordered or in last release order, and that's inconvenient. There's also I get a pop-up every time I try to download with my internet. I think I can change that in the settings, but there are many by default options that are not in accordance with me. So I think this problem I would have had changing to any other closed source platform which offers the services of podcasting, because it's just connecting to the RSS feed. But there were multiple cases in which I realized that the interface is not as curated as a closed source one. And this is a problem, but little by little, I've seen this app be much better than it was before. So I haven't used it for long, but I've seen previous versions and they looked horrible. So I think that the process of making the open source attractive and appealing to the customers is becoming democratized, and there's more and more of that. And in line with what you were saying, I did face a problem with it, or a couple of issues. There was a price to me transitioning away from the closed source, and I've had this with many other things. For example, I cannot use the banking app in my phone because I now use Graphene OS on my phone.
Do you have Sandbox Play services installed or no?
Yes. And the support for this OS was dropped in the last 5 weeks.
If you turn on every application in Graphene OS is a setting. I forget exactly what it is. It's something it's like a memory, a hard memory allocator thing. Sometimes you have to turn that off for the banking applications to work.
I tried. It specifically detects Graphene OS.
But do you see how there's like a price to switching to using something open source? And one of the things that Aaron at FUTO was trying to do is he wants it to be. So there's this argument of like the hyper-capitalist people that are trying to shitify everything, or the socialist, communist, open source people, where they don't like the idea of even saying buy software. Like I remember when Image, that was a piece of software. I remember using Nextcloud and saying this is shit, this sucks. And then I tried Image and it was great. And it's like there's just developers sitting in their bedroom just messing with the stuff on their free time. I asked him to hire them all, and the only thing that he changed, this the same AGPL license. All he said was, we're going to call this a purchase. We're not going to call it a donation. And his point was he wanted people to feel like they were actually paying for something. He didn't want you to feel like it was somebody shaking a cup on the street, like, please, sir, give me $1. He wanted it to be, if you find the work that I put my life into worthwhile, we would like you to purchase it for $10 or $20. And people lost their shit at the idea of it being called a purchase. Like, they absolutely lost their mind on it. And I was on his side of saying, yeah, I think call it a purchase. I mean, you're literally allowed to use it for free. The licensing terms say people can use it without paying for it from now until the end of time. But he wanted people to feel like if they got value from it, that they should pay something back, because he wants to create this model where people are willing to pay for software that they find useful, because he wants to send a message to the market that if you want to create good software, if you want to make a living, you don't have to work making shit for Facebook or Google or Apple or Amazon. You can make open source software, or you can make software like this and you can actually make money at it. You can be ethical, and you can also not be poor. And I think that needs to happen in order for a lot of this stuff to have that last 25% of polish that gets everybody to use it. And I like that he's doing that. I want to see more billionaires doing this, obviously. And he was telling me the story of this one company that tried to make their own cell phone here, and how you could very easily blow $300 to $500 million of money and have absolutely nothing to show for it, like not even have something that's FCC approved. So $1 billion can go surprisingly fast if you try to do too much too soon. So I like the approach he's taking, doing small steps at a time. It would be great to see more billionaires try to do that. I mean, just try to figure out. And the thing is, with that piece of software, I don't work there anymore, but I did for a long time, and I would see how much money he was bringing in a week. I'm not going to give away their personal books, but I would just look and I think, for something you could use for free, it's amazing how many people are paying $100 for this. And the amazing thing is, it works better, in my opinion, than Google Photos. I've tried Google Photos. I've tried Image. Image is better. And it is the open source solution. But the thing is, there's a lot of software where you pay a tax of shit just not working right. Like, you go to use the video editor, and I remember just trying video editors in Linux, even just using Kdenlive. Like, God bless the team, but you can't, there's no audio compressor that shows you gain reduction. It's like Yuri with the LA2A and the 1176 in 1970 they had gain reduction showing on their compressors. And in 2026, I can't see that in an audio plugin on a fucking video editing software. And it's like there's always this tax to be paid. And I did with open source software where you're paying with your time. And a lot of people would just rather pay with their money or pay with dealing with enshittification than pay with their time. But it's great to see more people trying to come up with ways to make this easy. Even with Frigate, if you want to get away from Ring cameras and doorbells and you want to use that, well, you have to set up Frigate, which means you have to know how to set up a YAML file, which means you have to have the indents right. And then if you want to have alerts on your phone every time somebody goes by your house, you have to set up Home Assistant with Mosquito Broker and an MQTT relay. And it's like,
Might I add something to the pricing of Swiss subscriptions, actually?
Go for it.
So, as a Swiss citizen, Switzerland is actually known for the most horrendous subscription pricing worldwide. And I have a little summary here. So, we actually have the most expensive YouTube Premium subscription, Netflix, as well as Spotify Premium. So the price hike for Spotify Premium individual since 2015 was 23%. For Netflix, the standard plan, that's not the family plan, in early 2015, it started at 12.90 francs. And it hiked up, that's after October 2025, it hiked up to a striking 77%, which is one of the biggest changes in subscription plans. Also, YouTube Premium individual, not as bad. For the individual plan, it got hiked up to 20%, but it has one of the most expensive family plans, which is a whopping 33 Swiss francs for the family plan. So for Swiss people, the whole subscription market is actually quite insane.
I know at least one Swiss person not using Spotify anymore, though.
But this kind of fuckery only happens because the market is isolated in some degree. So there's rich people who don't know of a better alternative who can be fucked with. But if the Swiss people realize that with a VPN you can create an account elsewhere, or that friends of yours from Germany are paying somewhat like half of what they are paying for Netflix or Spotify here, it's just ridiculous.
Well, there's some things I understand. Like when there would be a lot of Europeans in my chat when I started doing live streams back in 2015 saying, here's all the ways in which my country is superior to your country and look at all the protections we have. And then they would also say, they would ask me for recommendations for equipment. And I would give them my recommendations. I can't buy that, it's too expensive in my country. And it's like, I'm not saying it's wrong to have a mandatory 3 or 5 year warranty or something like that. I'm just saying that in the US where you could sell something and on day 90 say, fuck you if it dies, that's part of why it's cheaper. I don't know how that is with all the digital subscriptions and services. But I do know that used to come up consistently. I would say, here's the iron I use, here's the tips I use, here's the hot air station, the power supply, and everything else. And they go, it's 40% more money in my country. And in some cases, I guess there's the right that costs money. Or I think they're just baking it into their prices. Oh my God. Oh, okay, so that little Qtelix piece of shit headphone adapter I was trying to fix on stream, it allows you to connect wired headphones to your phone. It's a Bluetooth headphone amp. So I can connect to a phone that doesn't have that. And this little piece of shit that costs like $20 in the US. I was looking at one of them. It was like $20 in the US. It was like $119 at Digitech. Like I'll just buy. I understand the idea of it costs more money to buy something in a country where you actually have consumer rights. I get it. But I've noticed that in being in Switzerland. Like one example, gym memberships in the United States. So you can go to a Gold's Gym, like a fully featured gym, and I could go to any of the gyms in like a 30-mile radius or 50-mile radius, and I'm only paying $30 a month. And here, I'm going to all these different gyms, and when I do the conversion from Swiss francs to US dollars, of all the gyms, I'm looking at $130, $150 a month for a decent gym. But in the United States, if you try to cancel your gym membership, good luck with that shit. They will say, there's no cancel button on the website. When you call to cancel, they'll tell you have to first class mail these people. If you say, fuck it, I'm just going to get a new credit card, they'll send you to collections to destroy your credit score. Here, you have rights. It's just they charge you 4 or 5 months of gym for every month. So it's do you want to have rights? Do you want it to be cheap? Or with the headphone adapter, it was $119 at Digitech in this other store. And I'm looking at this shit on Amazon and one other, and I think Newegg, and it was $20 or $30.
I think that the problem is the bundling, because the rights are great, that people are offered transparency in what they are being offered. That's wonderful, and that they can opt out of their services in a more transparent way than in the US. I remember you mentioned that you can opt in by getting into a subscription in a gym in the US with one click, but to get out, you have to send the priority email. It's absolutely ridiculous, but the problem is in Switzerland, I think, is the bundling, because you are bundling many things that you should have the right to get out of. So why do I have to buy a two-year guarantee? What if I'm okay without it? What if I want to insure myself? Am I supposed to always hire you as so people pay a premium to your repair shop because it has an insurance. That's the reason why you can charge a premium, because they know that if they come to your shop, things will be repaired in a very good way and on time. There's no fuckery. There's all full transparency, and you have a reputation for it. That you're not gonna gamble now for a quick buck. But people who want to insure themselves can go to the competition. And you're glad about that. But we don't have that option in the Swiss market. Everyone who sells this kind of thing in an online retailer has to offer you the minimum guarantee of, 2 or 5 years. And that's a problem, because you cannot unbundle things.
Yeah, and what I'm noticing is I understand the idea of having certain consumer rights. And the argument made in the US with a lot of this is it will increase the cost of things. So for instance, ISPs were claiming that if you could cancel, that this would cost the economy over $100 million. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking to myself, wait, if you're saying, what you're doing when you say that if people could cancel their services easily, it would cost the economy $100 million, is you're saying that you're charging people $100 million a year in services that they don't fucking want, that they are just too busy or unable to cancel. Their argument was that it's going to cost us this much to add a cancel button to our website, which I think is just... I've hired some bad web developers in my time, man, but I think you could find somebody who make a cancel button a little cheaper than that. I hear what you're saying on bundling, which is I like the idea of consumer rights, and I don't think that a lot of the things that I advocate for are things that are going to increase the cost at all, because one thing where I've differed from EU kind of right to repair stuff is all the things that I'm asking for, like make available the same document to me that you make available to your technicians. I'm not saying that you need to sell me parts. I'm just saying don't tell the company that makes the parts they're not allowed to sell to me. So right now, for instance, Apple will tell Intersil, the company that makes the charging chips for everything, don't sell this to anybody else. Like, what if Intersil wants to sell to me? Like, maybe Intersil doesn't want to sell to me, even if I want to buy 100,000 of them in markup. Maybe they do. I'm not telling Apple, you need to stock all this stuff for me. I'm just saying, don't tell LG and AU Optronics and every other company that they're not allowed to sell to me or a larger distributor if they want to. Whereas I think the European approach is, you have to make these parts available. They must be available for this period of time. You must have this level of warranty. And I've actually, when I think through the type of legislation that I would want, I'm very careful with it as a business owner to make it written in a way where the company doesn't have the ability to say that. If this is not going to cost you more money, there's nothing that I'm asking you to do that's actually going to take up your time. Saying, making it illegal to break a digital lock, that doesn't put burden on the business. But I hear if you have to have a guarantee for 2 or 5 years, I understand why customers like these protections. And as a business owner, where I have a warranty that's listed as 1 year, but when people come back 2 or 3 years later and the shit's broken, there's only very few times. Somebody who came back, like you said, like, I got this fixed 6 years ago and I noticed that the battery that you gave me was completely slashed and going on fire. And I was like, outside of like really crazy cases, if somebody comes back 3 years later and says it stopped working, I usually just fix it for free. Just just to keep a good reputation, to keep people happy. But when I see like the consumer protection, but then I see the price of the product is not just $5 or $10 more, but they're literally charging like 4 times what it cost here. That's where I understand what you're talking about with bundling, where this thing is $20 here and it's like $119 or so on Digitech. It's like, you could literally just buy 3 of them and keep that thing in the box. And when the first one breaks or the second one breaks, just take out the third one. That's where that's where I can kind of roll my eyes at the idea of like everything being better. Because there's a lot of things that the U.S. does that are really fucking stupid. And I talk about the stupid things that my politicians, that the companies do on a regular basis. I believe patriotism means talking about not just like cheerleading all the stupid things, but talking about how they could be better and working to get there. But also, like, when people come into my YouTube chat and they're like, everything is a million times better in Europe. Okay, buy this thing. Wait, it's too expensive in my country. Like, I started to go down that rabbit hole. You're paying for that 3-year warranty. You're literally paying for 3 or 4 of the devices in some instance up front. And that's like that was something that I had to adjust to. Or like, even I've always praised the European model of actually allowing people to cancel and it just being illegal to do all this fuckery. And then I remember the first time that I visited Switzerland, just trying to find like a decent gym, and I saw the prices, and that's when it came to me. It's like, you're paying for your rights up front in a way. And my personal trainer always says this, like, what do gyms, a gym's primary business is selling services not rendered, because they rely on people signing up for shit and not canceling. Like when I go to a gym that is $30 a month, that is in the middle of downtown Austin, that is fully featured and has every piece of brand new equipment, they clean it regularly, they got showers. People who signed up for their New Year's resolution that don't want to go through the hell of figuring out how to priority mail their cancellation are paying for my membership. Whereas I imagine that happens less here, because if you say, yo, I want to cancel, you just got to cancel.
Exactly. And I think that this is a matter of the way we think the institution should be made to optimize it the most we can. So maybe in this case, we only have one law ruling over everyone, but we could have multiple standards. So standard 1, standard 2, standard 3. We offer you this kind of coverage over your products, but maybe that's too much bandwidth. And I'm expecting the customers to know these 3 kinds of standards that offer you different things. And maybe that's not realistic. So I don't exactly know what the optimal institutional approach for this would be, but transparency always seems good. And obfuscating information always seems like a parasitic behavior from my side. If you're making something seem more complex than it actually is, just so that you can have a profit at my expense, I don't think that's legitimate in the way that offering a war service for cheaper is. If I'm offering transparently a war service, then that's my business model. There should be a business model for whomever is willing to invest the capital in offering that.
That was what I was excited about that California law for, that says if you're offering something for sale, but the company has the ability to take it away, you can't use the word sell, sold, or purchase anymore. And they are not enforcing that law at all. They're just sending out form letters to everybody saying, essentially, if you want to actually pursue this, you should go find a lawyer. AKA, you know, and this is what gets libertarians riled up, which is you're paying top tier taxes for a government that is as useless for you as my state government. For the most part, the consumer protection, like they don't give a fuck. But I don't pay state income tax. Whereas people in California pay very high state income taxes to a government that is supposed to defend their rights, and they just get a form letter that's copied and pasted 11 months later saying, you know, politely, like, go fuck yourself, find a lawyer who gives a shit. And like that's annoying. I think that there has to be balance. Like having no consumer protection or having laws that are as some restrictive in some cases as some of the EUs are, where the product just costs like you just see the companies like, okay, I'll give you rights and charge you 2 to 3 times as much to buy the same thing. There has to be a balance somewhere, and I don't see the balance. I see the people either rooting for socialism and communism, or the people that are saying like an anarcho-capitalist free market with no government is the perfect thing in the world. And I think people are just kind of scattering everywhere into the more extremes corners of it because they're just so frustrated at shit not working.
Yes, and on the practical level, on a user day-to-day, on a day-to-day basis, the consumer can feel like their music doesn't belong to them. I don't have the ownership over it. I'm not sovereign over my devices, because at any moment where I do what my provider doesn't want me, like with Netflix, this is something that you've talked a lot about, that if you don't stream your service through the specific encoder and with the screen that you need that is allowed by Netflix, you cannot use 4K. But if you pirate it, you can play the 4K wherever you want.
Yeah, if I remember paying extra for the Netflix 4K plan, and this is the part that would bother me. And this is where I just say fuck all digital locks, and I don't feel guilty pirating stuff. I want to pay for things. Like when I was 13 and I first got the internet, I didn't necessarily always pay for everything because my job back then was I shoveled snow in the winter and I charged $10 a walkway. Like I did have a lot of money. But as an adult that has multiple businesses, I'm at the point where I don't pirate stuff if I don't have to, because I can afford to pay for it. And I want to feel good in charging my customers when I'm asking for money for a service. What helps me feel good about it and confident is that I pay for all the things that I find valuable in my own life. But when I pay you extra money because it says 4K on there and then it looks like shit, and then I open up the inspector or something, and I see the bit rate is like less than a megabit a second, and it's 720p. Hey, fuck you. And then and the reason for that is you have to use it with their server. You have to use their app. Okay, I use their app, but my TV has to connect to the internet. My TV has a 70-page end user license agreement about how it's capturing shit and sending it. Like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to pay for it. So I paid for my full price for my Netflix, and after paying the full price, I just pirated every single show that I wanted to watch in 4K, and I watched it that way. Yeah, you're right. You don't actually own access to any of these things. And it's not even necessarily about the company being able to take it away or wanting to watch it the way you want it. It's that there are books that have been pulled from Amazon, and there was, I think, Roald Dahl, I forget the guy's name, it's on the tip of my tongue, but there was a gentleman who's long passed away, and he had books posted, and people found certain things he said offensive. So they didn't make a new edition of the book. They edited the editions that were already up. And this is a dangerous thing to start doing, because let's say you want to point, if you start doing that, how do you even point to the original to tell people why it was wrong or why you thought it was wrong if you edited that version of the book that exists? So it's even just for archival purposes, some level of piracy ends up being necessary if we live in a world where you don't have a physical copy of things anymore, or the physical copies you have require connection to somebody else's server in order to use them. That you lose freedom of speech, and more importantly, you lose history that way. And there are even people that agree with censorship that are very more left wing that will say, yeah, you should. That's bullshit that happened. I hate that guy. I hate what he said. But how can I even tell people what I hate and what he said if you edited it? And instead of making a 6th edition, you just revised the 5th edition, the 4th, the 3rd, and the 2nd. So in order for you to even be able to still have the same book or the same movie that you paid for, there has to be some element of piracy involved, or else all these things would go away.
If you offer a nice, convenient product, people pay for it. And that's exactly what your business is. They know that if you come to your repair shop in Texas, they're going to be able to have everything repaired at a fair price, and everything is going to be perfect. But they have the alternative of doing it by themselves in an inconvenient way for free. They can you offer yourself everything, all the processes that you use to repair everything, basically. So if you want to go the inconvenient way, you can go that way, and it will take more time, so you will pay with your time, as you were mentioning before, or you can go there paying money and having everything convenient. But you cannot get both. If you are asking me to pay for a subscription and simultaneously ask me to figure out the encoder and everything in the TV, no, fuck you. If I pay you, I don't think about that.
Yeah, yes. And I think that so many people told me that I was an idiot when I started doing videos on how to do this, because they thought, well, you're just showing your competition how to do with this, or people are going to undercut you. And true, a bunch of people did, but I didn't care. I always saw it as I'm going to increase the size of the pie rather than increase my share of it. And I am a capitalist. I am greedy. I want to make money, but I also want to make money not in that restrictive way. I don't want to make money because somebody feels like they only can go to me, or they don't know how to do it themselves. Here's how to do everything I do. Here's all the equipment. Here's the exact manuals that I use. Here's the exact process for everything. And you choose, do you want to do it yourself, or do you want to have me do it? Or if I manage to train somebody who's cheaper than me, you can choose. Do you want to go with somebody who's cheaper than me who learned how to do this recently, or do you want to use me? I feel good taking money from people when I know that you have all the choice in the world to go anywhere else. And I don't want to win because I'm the only one. I want to win because I'm the best choice for that particular person in the market at the price that I'm charging, or because I'm doing everything that I should to win. And I wish more companies saw it that way. They didn't have to trap their customers in order to get them to use them. And again, if you have to trap somebody in order to get them to use your product or service, how good is it to begin with?
You're crazy coherent at so many levels. It's just you've thought through this so much, and you've applied it at so many levels, even at your own business. The more I know about you and your history, the more levels at which the same thread of logic I see applied at everything. And normally we find hypocrisy in people. You're acting this way in this place, but I haven't seen that with you. And I wish more people did it this way, because the more consistently you live, and this is also something I've been personally facing in my own life. And also you, because you moved out of New York for environmental reasons in New York. They weren't positive politically. And I did the same thing. I moved out of Spain because I didn't agree with the local government. So I think being more consistent ends up being worthwhile in the long term, even though in the short term you're leaving some money in the table. But the money you're leaving in the table is not actually literally on the table, never for you. You're just allowing the other side in the equation to have a bigger profit now, and in their eyes you're more attractive as a provider, or even as a worker. If you're being supposedly underpaid based on the price you could get elsewhere, you're becoming more attractive. You're going to be offered more alternatives, more options. They're willing to give you more work because you're using part of your budget in marketing.
People like to not feel like they're being twisted into something. So if I tell somebody, here are the things you can do that are free, here are all the ththings that let me show you exactly how to do this yourself. Here are 3 or 5 of my students that have watched all these videos and know how to do this stuff. They like it breaks their brain. They're not used to actually being offered a choice. It's like, wait, you're not trying to fuck me? Like, I do want to make money. I just want you to choose to use me to make money rather than being forced into it. That was my method of sales. I wasn't twisting people's arm and saying you have to use this. I would just give them all their options. And when people feel safe, they want to give you money. And this goes back to the whole patent thing. If you implement your idea well, you don't have to use the power of government to say nobody else is allowed to make this. What if people just actually wanted to use your product and service? What if they liked you? Again, people every single day choose to spend more money on something because it has a brand name on it that they're familiar with. And oftentimes, those are not even companies that are nice to people. They're companies that treat people like garbage. But this is familiar, I know it, I've seen it. Imagine if those companies were actually nice to people as well. There are a lot of times where people actually choose to pay with their wallet for things that are useful and good without being forced into it. And if they didn't feel like they were forced into it, maybe they'd pay even more.
And in the margin, for the craziest of the people, there will be many technical oriented people who know how to use the tech in a more inconvenient way and are willing to spend their time. If you lose the ability to profit from them, then the signal will be sent in the market. You have profit from being able to, from offering a service that's neat, clean, convenient, and who doesn't want cheap. So if you package all of those things together, something that you plug and play, that you make the transactions and immediately you have the service, who doesn't want to pay for that? And so of course there's a profit to be made by offering a good service. It's just that if you fuck around long enough, piracy will come and you will find out.
I do think that there are some broken markets that I think like some libertarians don't take into account. Like one example I had with this was when I was trying to be an eBay seller back in 2011 to 2013. So there was some algorithm with eBay where to get to the, like, you know how you can sort by lowest price or best match? A part of getting to best match, what I heard at the time, I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, but what they would say is it was the ratio of people who click on something to people who buy it. So if more people who clicked on something bought it, you would then get featured in best match. And very often the people who wound up making it there were the people who were the lowest price. Because if enough people who searched by lowest price clicked and then bought it, then you eventually can become best match. And I remember selling screens back in the day for laptops. I would say, I'm a technician. I use these in my own store. They have no stuck pixels. I will overnight you a new screen if you get a bad one. All my competitors say you have to wait 7 days to send it back and then pay for shipping for 7 days to get it to you. I will overnight you a new one if you have a single stuck pixel. I'll take a picture of it before you buy it that shows that it has no stuck pixel. If I was 1 cent above the primary seller, I would sell 5 a day. If I was 1 cent below the primary seller, I would sell 300 to 1,000 a day. Now, I used to think to myself very cynically, people choose this. This is what the market wants. The market wants the cheapest price and nothing else. But that wasn't what was happening. A small number of people wanted the lowest price product. And then because of the way the algorithm worked, of that, like the whole thing where it's the ratio of people who click to people who buy, then the cheapest product would also sometimes become the best match. And once you became best match, you were always what people chose. And then like if you have to scroll down to number 7 or 8 to find me, they already clicked on the first one. So was it really that people didn't want quality? Or is it that people don't click 7 to 20 options to buy something, and they also didn't assume the first person was going to screw them, so they didn't know that my offer to pre-test the screen and give you free return shipping and free overnight you a new one if it was bad mattered. They didn't know that the marketplace was filled with people that would buy grade A- screens. That's where you buy a box of screens where some of them are bad, but you don't know which, and it's much cheaper. Like even if only one screen is bad in the box out of 20, it's so much cheaper. And they would sell those to people, and the way they'd figure out which ones had the stuck pixels is when they would bitch and leave negative feedback. I would advertise, I'm not doing that, and even if with my good box, I'm pre-testing all of them before they go to you. And I used to get really cynical and think everybody just wants the cheapest shit, fuck this entire industry. And then I realized it really just is like this small element of the market is defective in this way, and that they don't know when they click that person is selling grade A-. There's no restriction from selling that, and it's always, and whoever was the cheapest at this particular in this sales venue would always be at the top because of that whole click to buy ratio. If the click to buy ratio is higher, you'd be closer to best match. There are some times where the market like has these little wrinkles in it. And that goes back to when like libertarians would say, well, people chose this. They chose enshittification. They chose this. My customers, 99% of the ones that I talked to were not choosing the cheapest. They just didn't know that I existed. And like, yes.
Yeah, I know the owner of a restaurant, and he told me once something very analogous to what you were saying, that he wished he could sell Black Agnus steak and charge people 60 francs for a meal, or something more substantial, of better quality. He loves that. He's a high-end cooker, and he himself knows how to cook this kind of stuff at a high level. But what people were demanding were fries, were normal stuff that very, very average. And he was disappointed by that, but he was pragmatical. So he was like, well, I know how to offer you the best thing, but you do not appreciate it. And because of how in your case, it's more of the algorithm that was fucking with you, because it wasn't able to appreciate the value that you were providing. But that's also something that's hard for the customer to appreciate, because in this case, the customers of this restaurant were purchasing things that were bad for them in a higher proportion that he would have liked, and he would have loved to provide them the best thing for a fair price. It's just that that's not where the demand was. And I think that the customers, when there's transparency, they will have higher likelihood of realizing the value of what you were providing. I'm not gonna free shipping next day. The screen will be by you if what you get is not good. And all of those things are more abstract, more difficult to process. There's more bits of information, but the picture and the price are the first two bits of information that everyone is expecting to process. And if many people fuck you up, then you will expect the same thing from the next person. And how exactly? There's not an Excel sheet where you can add a new column saying, do you fuck up your customers? And then in your case, it would be no. And all the other ones, yes. So people can filter by being fucked up. But
it was somebody. We were watching a documentary on this tomato. When Lilia comes back, she'll probably laugh at this. It was a documentary on making these. I forget what kind they were doing. If they were fucking with the tomatoes to make them last longer, but the tomatoes were not. They didn't have any taste, and also a lot of them they had much lower nutrition. And they asked the owner of the company that was making these seeds, "Do you think that people would pay or would buy yours as much if instead of just seeing the tomato and its color or the vegetables, they could also see the nutritional value, like how much zinc, how much magnesium, how much calcium, how much of all these things are in your tomato versus the others? And if they saw that this tomato has 20% of the nutrients of that one, would they be okay with paying 20% less for it, but getting 80% less nutrients?" And the owner is like, well, that's what people choose. That technology doesn't. Yeah, if that technology existed, where you could scan a vegetable and you could see that your bullshit ass vegetable had 20% of the nutrients of this one, and he wouldn't give a straight answer. And I think, but it's right. When I go into a supermarket and I see there's 3 different brands of tomato, I have no fucking clue which tomato has the right nutrients. They're not going to let me eat one as a sample in the supermarket. You can see it, you can touch it, and you can see the price. And when people would say, well, people are and they said the market demands this tomato. The market always demands it, so that's what we're giving the market. But the consumer doesn't necessarily have all of the information necessary to make that informed decision unless they've watched this documentary. And even after they watch the documentary, well, when I go to the supermarket, what the hell do I even know to buy?
I had recently a conversation with one of the young liberal people from the canton of Aargau next to Zurich, and I asked her, if there's a conflict, if there's a difference in interest between your customer and you, if your customer wants so we were talking about a vending machine. If this belonged to you, what exactly would you sell there? Because she was criticizing the bad quality of the things being sold there. And I said, okay, if you were the owner, what exactly would you sell? Because you have the option. You can sell your salads, your high protein things, your healthy general water, everything that you would like it to be. Or you can sell the unhealthy stuff that they are offering and sell more. Because I think the people who designed this vending machine know what the customer is demanding. So unfortunately, superficialness, the over-indexing on looks that exists, I think looks are over. Why do we think of it as something superficial? Because there's something there that's not being accounted for by it, right? So what you're seeing in the chocolate cookie that you can buy from the vending machine, it's very attractive short term. It feels good, but the long-term consequences are not as easily touched or easily realized. So I asked this woman, what would you do? Would you offer the thing that people are actually demanding and match the structure of this vending machine and maximize your sales? Or would you try to put in there your ethics, your morals, your values, and maybe sell less? And the answer is not clear cut. She saw the conflict. So you can make more money selling worse things, or you can follow your values and sell less. So what exactly are we supposed to do? How are you going to make a circle out of this square? How do you personally handle this?
I realized the mistake that I was making in my instance was fundamentally, when I was talking about a broken market, eBay is not a place that people go for quality shopping. eBay is a place people go to find a deal. The entire concept of going to eBay versus a normal store is I want to see if there's a cheap version of this. I want to see if there's an open box version. So I'm trying to sell this product in a marketplace that's fundamentally made for the grade A- product. And even though people complain when they get the grade A- product, like, you bought it on eBay, bro, what do you want? And so that was the mistake that I was making. The way I was supposed to be doing this is I'm supposed to have a website where I sell things that using my brand name, and they're great. And like, I offer that level of service for a little bit more money. And on eBay, I'm supposed to have some sort of throwaway brand name that's just some random thing that's not like my actual company name, and to just be the cheapest and sell all the grade A- shit there. And like, that was the way I was supposed to be operating. And I realized I just didn't want to operate like that. It just felt dirty, and I got out of that business altogether. And there are some instances where I don't, like, if I had to make that choice, like, do I want to sell a lot and sell people stuff that's bad for them, or do I want to make less money and sell something that's good for people? It would be very difficult to be in that industry. And even in repair, that exists to some extent. There are services like reflowing or reballing a chip, where if you heat up a chip, it'll, like, for 30 to 60 days, it'll for certain flip chip EGA designs, like graphics chips and game consoles and graphics chips on laptops, it will work better for a short period of time, and then it will die again. And there are many places that offer that service for $50 or $75 because you don't even have to take the chip off the board. I've given up. I've refused so much business and lost so much money by refusing to do this because I don't want to do something that's just going to be bad for people. That's going to die.
But fortunately, there's a whole spectrum, and there's a gradient between the two options. So maybe what you could do to maximize your positive impact in the world would be selling the grade A- service or product that's slightly better than what others are offering. So you have a slightly less profit than others, but still adapting to it. So without being in the 0 or the 1 in terms of quality and what your values would dictate, you behave better than the average in the market. So you slightly, little by little, offer whomever buys from you will realize that this is slightly better, and you will nudge the whole market in that direction, and then offer something slightly better and something slightly better. But saying that your one is the best one, and of course, from the value perspective, I cannot debate that. I just agree. But from a pragmatical perspective, maybe you have to meet them at a middle point and offer them quality is important. You have to learn about this. But because you're not going to buy my one version, that's the best one, I will buy you something in between. And then you will get a taste of the quality, and you will want to go in this rabbit hole.
I've thought about that. And like, I've thought about selling the junky ones on eBay and the good ones on my side. But then I just thought, I'm adding, the entire reason I started that company was because I was sick of buying the junky ones and it not being advertised as the junky ones. So I thought I could just be honest and say, yeah, this is a grade A- thing in the listing. You may get a stuck pixel, and if you do, I don't really care. But then I become the thing that I hate in order to succeed in that market. And then what I realize is I just don't want to be in that market at all. That market sucks. I would rather admit that making money in that is difficult and leave it to somebody who's okay with the difficulty of trying to. We were just talking about the tomatoes earlier.
Which ones?
The tomatoes, and how, like, it's difficult.
Seeds?
Yeah, and like how people don't necessarily choose when they show up to a grocery store, and how the CEO of the company making the seeds was asked if people could tell the difference between these seeds, would they actually, if they could see this tomato has 80% more nutrition than this tomato, do you think they'd still buy yours even though yours is slightly cheaper? And he just couldn't give a straight answer. Because I've always thought if the market is broken that way, what can I do to inform people as much as possible so that they actually know what's going on? And then maybe after informing them, they'll be open to whatever it is that I'm doing, rather than trying to conform to the things that are broken in it. I think that the people who are going to succeed and make in the capitalist world in making services that don't suck are going to have to be able to tell people up front, here are all the different ways that we cannot screw you because we've actively built our system so that they can't. And I think that's what FUTO is doing successfully. When they made Image, they have the 5 pillars available. It's AGPL licensed. We can't take this away from you even if we wanted to. Even if I wanted to be evil. When I was there, the entire thing I was building up, and this was an area of disagreement between myself and Aaron, is I was always saying, like, he wanted people to trust the company, and I said the reason you should trust it is because we don't ask you to. We can't and shouldify this shit if we tried. There's nothing that I could do to fuck you over when you pay for this. You get a downloaded file. You actually have the source code of it. You can do what you want with it. I'm trying to imagine a way that we actually could make the thing shittier, and it's impossible. So companies that are going to compete with the companies that are making things shittier are going to have to figure out a way to tell their customers, here is why you don't want to use our competitor. They're going to have to actively go out and say they have the ability to turn these things off. They've built their software in a way where it's easy for them to spy on you. And here's why you should care. And like that's a difficult uphill battle. And I hope to see more companies go for it.
I love that you are an example of success, because I've been facing the same trade-off in my own life at multiple stages. Of course, I'm still very young, so I still don't have much experience. But to whichever extent I have had experience, I've faced this trade-off between my ideals and the pragmatical stuff. So when I was still in Spain and I was talking a lot about how the political system didn't work and free markets work and all my crazy ideological stuff, many people were saying, well, maybe you're right, but to be able to work in the government, and because that's the only place where you can get somewhat of good of a salary, you have to follow the rules. And I was like, no, I don't feel like that's right. Because yes, sure, short term I can get a quick buck by doing that, but I will sell my soul. I will feel like I'm not doing the highest thing. And I've been trying to follow the North Star I had in many different dimensions of my life for the last 5-6 years. And to the extent to which it has worked, I think it's evidence that if you follow the principle long term, it has a higher chance of working than short term. So if this is going to work, you have to commit to it, and you have to push for it for much longer than anyone would think reasonable. And that you are an example of success with your platform and with your business and FUTO and so many initiatives. I think you have 4 businesses, 2 non-profit and 2 for-profit companies.
I lose count sometimes.
that you are an example of success is one more point of evidence that I needed in my own life to say, if you follow your values long term, it might work.
One of the things that's frustrating for me is that after all this time of doing this, one of the nonprofits I started was one of the things I was doing at Repair Preservation Group was we made this wiki where people could contribute repair information for niche devices. So one of the things that keeps repair shops from doing certain repairs is it may take 80 hours to figure out or reverse engineer how this device works, but I need to be able to do this repair for 40 to 60 bucks. So that's not worth it unless I'm going to see the device 20,000 times over. And that's what made it very easy for me to do this with a lot of the MacBook laptops I was working on, is I was getting 30 or 40 of them a day. So it was actually worth my time to sit there until 4 a.m. and figure out these really weird little flaws. And I tried to get other people to contribute, and I was even offering money. And sometimes people would say, I don't want other people to know how to do what I'm doing. I think it'll take away from my business. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, how many years do I have to show people how to do things for free before they realize it's not going to do that? Like, I thought it would show we're just increasing the pie. Like, the more people that are happy with repair services, the more they're going to tell everybody, hey, you don't have to throw that away. You can get it fixed. And in spite of how large the repair pie has become since, like, a lot of the board repair stuff I did became popular on YouTube, there's so many more people doing board repair on YouTube now. But in 2013, 2014, there was nobody besides me doing that. And there's still people that'll say, I want to keep it for myself. I'm not going to show other people how to do this. I'm not going to share my secrets, because if I do, maybe people will stop using me and I'll make less money. And it's just like, fuck my life. Like, how long do I have to do this for before people will realize that you can show other people how to do what you know how to do and also still have value in society? So I appreciate that you said that is like, that you've seen that this works.
Yes, and I think the principal misconception in this last comment you made is that you're so far from saturating the market, but so orders of magnitude away from it, that if you share some valuable information that other people are not actually sharing, you're going to differentiate yourself in a way that you're going to 10x, 100x your market share, and you're just going to make everything better without sacrificing any customers, because you are only like 0.1% of the market. So if you offer everything openly and you gain a reputation for that, because that becomes viral. If you offer something that's good, people are going to realize, they're going to share it, and through the word of mouth, that's going to be known. And so your market share is going to, the whole pie is going to multiply many times, because there's another pie from which you're eating, which is the Apple closed source bullshit that they're not allowing you to repair. And now, because the knowledge is known by more people, more of it can be repaired, and your pie is just growing. So the instinct, I think, it's the same one with patents, with so some of the socialist thinking is also influenced by this. The thinking that we cannot, that the pie is given. So a defensive way of behaving, from a business perspective or even personally, would be the right one. But actually not. Once you open and you allow everyone, and you're transparent about your values and what you follow, and you act by them, it will pay off in the long term. I think that defensive reflex is something that we have to account for mindfully and open up and realize that everything improves. But it has to be, maybe short term doesn't, but medium to long term, for sure it does.
Yeah, I get a lot of comments from people saying they think that I'm a socialist because of the things that I say. And it's like, I think I'm a capitalist who just believes that you can make money without being a dick. I would like to see more of this exist. Like Aaron is a capitalist. I see the money that comes in from the software that people purchase from his company, and he allows people to do whatever they want with most of the software. All he asks with some of his licenses is if you're using it for commercial use, that you have a conversation with them first, so it's not a fully open source license. Or if he wants to avoid the situation where Google and YouTube are bringing in 20 to 40 billion using FFmpeg, and FFmpeg gets like a Google summer of code. That just doesn't feel like a fair value trade. So if you're Google and you want to use something that they create, no, you can't use it for $5. But I like the idea of trying to show that capitalism doesn't have to necessarily be inherently exploitative or shitty. And sometimes I feel like I'm losing there, but I try.
Mm-hmm. And that it has worked is evidence for it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's still room to improve and to optimize, but you're already above the 90th percentile in any conceivable scale. And so what exactly are the average per people criticizing you for not selling off soon advocating for? I would like to have a conversation with whomever criticizes this. Okay, what exactly are you proposing, and what exactly have you done? Because if you're proposing, no, you should have sold off your values in the beginning, get your governmental job in Spain, and just sell your soul because you're doing something that you consider administrative and soulless, let's say. I could have done that, but what exactly are those people having that? Because if you have, like, I'm not going to take fitness advice from a fat person, right? So I wouldn't take value following advice from a person who hasn't followed any values and doesn't have anything to show for it.
What was that? What were they asking you to give up there? Or like, what was the quick decision? Because I don't think I fully understand what they were asking you to do.
Idealism. It's I was putting a lot of emphasis on how things weren't working, and I think that different political systems would be better. And they were saying, yeah, sure, maybe you're right. I'm not sure about that, but right now you have an option. You can learn this, do this course on this specific thing, and get a job in the government and get a relatively good paying salary for the standards of Spain. And I didn't want, or even going to university was one more level on which I did this. I was incentivized by my teachers, and I did an apprenticeship in a trade school, and I didn't go to university. And many people were saying, oh, you can go to university, study this because you're interested in all of these things. And I was like, no, I don't want to, because I know how politically biased they are. I know how much bureaucracy I'm going to be dealing with. So I prefer to much better go to Switzerland. And even if I have to work as a cleaner for a year or two in the beginning, I'm willing to do that until I learn German. I get a network of people, and then at some point I got the job at the magazine I'm working now, Schweizer Monat, where I'm doing what is very aligned with my values. So I think it does pay off long term if you do it. And it took me less than finishing the degree in Spain. So I would still be learning that. I would still be doing the degree if I stayed. So maybe I'm not representative of the population. It could be noise in the sample, that it's just a lack. But I think there's something to it. And that you are an example of more developed, because you have more experience than me and more success in every way. It's a case to be made that there is a benefit long term to following your values and staying loyal to them.
Yeah, I don't think you get all the benefit in the beginning, but I think it may come later. I mean, I didn't have my first piece featured in real press until 2018. I started my company in 2008 or 2009. There was a neighbor of mine that, I didn't get my first real feature in the press until 2018. And I think that there was like a neighbor of mine that didn't do business the way I would want them to do business. And they got mentioned, I think, in 2009, 2010. And they were getting all these people from the New York Times. They were getting all these customers coming in every day. And I think they went out of business like 5 or 7 years ago. Like, you get an increase up front by doing business unethically. But there's life doesn't always start fair, but my finding is it becomes more fair over time when you do things in the right way. People take notice.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like a gravitational pull. If you do the things right, short term, the benefits of your high nutrition tomato won't be seen and won't be appreciated, but the time it would take the market to realize the benefit of the tomato would be longer. So if you expose your offer to the market for a time frame in which people can realize the benefit of it, because there has to be, this was a phrase from an economist which I utterly disagree with, John Maynard Keynes. He said that, sure, you can go for the long term, but in the long term we're all dead. So you have to optimize for the short term for whatever people are, the expectations of the market. And I think that's wrong, because we're not dead in the long term. Of course, I'm going to die in the long term, but my children will be there, and the children of my children might be there. So you have to think in the longest of the time frames, independent of how long your sack of meat that your bodies will last for.
Well, one of the arguments against having an inheritance or tax is that if I know that the money's not going to go to my kids, why not just spend it all on hookers and blow or something? Why care about my business? If you have something to pass on, or if you have a legacy to pass on, you actually care about maintaining it to some extent. And I would hope that the things that I do would make the world better for my kids rather than shittier. Are there any, what are any topics questions that you had that you didn't touch on? What are the things you wanted to get to?
I think that we covered most of it. I have a couple notes I could check, but the argument of the marginal change and how it affects and it changes the balance of power from the enshittifier to the customer, and that applies to every level. Even that we already covered, but you're of course free to elaborate.
When you said argument of marginal change, what is that exactly?
Yes, the essay I sent you was called Changes Made in the Margins, or I still don't have a settled name for it, but it was basically that I think that the market is made of margins. And there was the Marginal Revolution by Karl Menger in 1900s, I think. I might be getting the date wrong, but he had he created a revolution in economics because he brought to the people the solution to the paradox between a diamond and water. So why is water so cheap when it's so valuable, and without it we wouldn't be able to survive? And why is a diamond, when it's completely superfluous, so expensive? And the answer was the margin, that the next unit of a diamond is 100% of your portfolio of diamonds, but the next unit of water is less than 0.1% of the water you already had access to in all the other forms. And you have pipes that industrially produce it and industrially transfer it. So the marginal benefit to the next liter of water is very small, but the marginal benefit of the next diamond is huge because you don't have many. So this explains a lot of it. And I think that the same principle applies also to what you're doing with FUTO. The marginal change that you create, the marginal benefit of letting more people know about it will change the pricing. If there's more supply of something, the price will drop. So if you create a bigger supply of knowledge of how to repair things, of an extension that lets customers know that the product they're checking is enshittified in some way, that's going to, in the margin, increase the supply of the correcting mechanism, and it's going to lower the price. So people are not going to keep buying at that price. So they're going to either have to lower it. So you're selling shit at shit price. That's fair. You can sell that. But you cannot sell shit at a premium. That's what I have a problem with. The difference between price and value. That's what I have an issue with. But the marginal revolution that's happening progressively, the bottom up with your initiative, Wikipedia-like, and your platform on YouTube and your audience, this is exactly, there's no real center. One could say the center is institutions, and because they affect everything, but they're also marginal in some way because there's not a central government. So if you pass the legislation in Texas, I think you had a video with someone, I'm not remembering the name now, but they made the case that if you pass the legislation in one place, I think he was from California. He had a huge company, repair company. It was in 2018, if I don't remember wrong. It was part of the first media appearance that you had, and they were interviewing you in New York and him in California. And
Kyle.
iFixit. Yeah, it was that guy. I really liked him. He was very nice in the interview. I liked it, and he was trying to make the case that if you offer people an alternative, and little by little they realize that it exists, then the competition will have to offer something better. And he was following the the values that he had and still was able to have a couple hundred employees. And that's an incredible, amazing example of that following these values or whatever values you have can pay off in the long term. And the marginal revolution that I was talking about is changing the cost-benefit analysis of people so that there's more transparency with information. And little by little, if you shitify things, chances are worse for you in getting away with it. So you might not feel the benefit from it short term of making the advocacy, but you're already having the benefit, so there's no case to be made with there. But I think there's still exponential benefit in the future.
Most things that I've done in my life, it usually goes like this, and then like this. And like 99% of people give up here, and like it, or like they go like this. But for the most part, most people give up before they realize am I falling off a cliff or going up with it, and that's what I hope here.
Yes. Oh, sorry. It came up to my mind. I went blank for a moment. It was the iFixit was trying to make the case that if you pass the regulation in one specific place, the companies have systems that have to be cost optimized. So if there's a regulation forcing the company to provide with the right of repair, it will have to be also applied to any other place.
Yeah, and you can't make it. How are you going to sell a schematic to California, or how are you going to sell a schematic to Switzerland, but it doesn't end up in Sweden or Norway? It's just not how this works. I mean, on the internet with files.
See, I think you're absolutely right. And they could maybe create two types of phones. So one phone with one design that they publish in Norway and then another one that they could do here. But the economies of scale just force you. If you want to access the market of Norway, you're going to have to do it in some way. And because you don't want to do it in a different way for Switzerland, you will offer the Swiss people the same.
Like how do you sell a part to somebody in Switzerland, but you don't sell to someone in Sweden? Because if you sell it to somebody in Switzerland, that person will open up a store that then sells those parts to people in every other country. It's one of those things where it kind of opens the floodgates to everybody. It's not the same as a digital service where, even with the digital service, you could just use a VPN to be able to access it from elsewhere. But I know with gyms, in America, if you say, okay, California has a law that says you have to have a cancel button, there are a lot of companies where if you don't have a billing address of California, you don't get a cancel button. But if you put a California billing address, you get a cancel button on their website for the gym. It's different with hardware. How are you going to make a schematic available for this device in this area, but not for that device in that area?
Exactly. You cannot. So you have to open the gates. Yeah, I don't want to extend this for longer than it needs to, but the ad blocks as a transition, I think we didn't touch enough on this. If you use an ad block, you're making also marginally, following the argument I made before about marginal analysis and marginal changes in the world, installing uBlock Origin, which is the extension that you always advocated for because it's open source and it's great, and it's also the one I installed in every computer I've touched. It's an app, ad blockers in general, that transitions the profit to be made from a data harvesting advertising community toward business model, not community, towards a business model that's more transparent and sells you things to the face. And I think in this way, using ad blockers is perfectly legitimized.
Well, one of the things I was saying with the algorithm and how eBay worked is the ratio of clicks to buys is what gets you to the top. So it naturally makes people say, I'm just going to I'm going to make my stuff the lowest price until I get there, and then I can screw people. I think that with ad blockers, what I like about it is you're kind of fixing a broken market in a different way, which is the content that people make, if they know they're making it just to maximize viewership versus payment. So people get paid for doing YouTube videos, and I get paid for making YouTube videos. But what if instead of getting paid based on maximum viewership, I got paid based on people actually finding it valuable? Because what I've told people is if you give me $1, I honestly, if every YouTube subscriber that I had gave me 8 cents, I would make infinitely more money off of that 8 cents than I make off of YouTube in a year. Like way more money. And that's 8 cents, probably closer to 5 cents. My CPM is ridiculously low. I'm not saying people should donate to me. I'm not asking them to. But the point is that it changes the calculus of how you do things. Instead of maximizing viewership, you're looking at maximizing value. If people were actually paying for the stuff they consumed, then you would wind up with probably a much different marketplace for news, a much different marketplace for video, a much different marketplace for content. And the thing I like about ad blockers in general is not just that I don't like viewing ads because I don't like viewing ads, but what you're doing is if you pay the people that you find content from useful and you use an ad blocker all the time, you're encouraging a more healthy content ecosystem. because I now actually have to make something that you think is worth paying for rather than something that you think is worth viewing. And there are many things that we may view that we think, there's no way in fuck I would ever pay for this. This is like, I don't want to support this. It's silly or it's ridiculous or it makes me mad, but I don't actually feel like I've gained value from it. So I think that if everybody used an ad block, you'd have a more healthy marketplace. And that's aside from the fact that you're dealing with all the collection of data that happens when you don't use an ad blocker. I encourage everybody to use an ad blocker because I think that you just get a better market. The only difficult thing with that is friction. How do you make it the way that these systems work? When you view an ad, somebody has made money, it's tracked immediately. We would have a different internet if in 1997 there was some sort of crypto wallet that you put money into, your ISP had it, and every time you visited a website, you paid 0.0005 cents if you wanted to view something. And it was a universal thing across all websites. Because having to add my credit card, having to log in, two-factor authentication, any of that stuff is all friction. Even if you had it just so you just put the fingerprint in your phone and it automatically takes your money, which it isn't for a lot of things, that's still friction. And I think the reason that the ad solution is working isn't necessarily because people don't want to pay. It's just because it kind of takes away that friction from things. And I think the reason that we have what we have now is I think the seeds were sowed for this in the late 90s, early 2000s, back when people were saying $15 for a CD is way too much money. That's way too much. There's no way in hell I would ever pay that much. Even if it's a really good performance, everybody wanted to pirate everything. And I understand why. They wanted convenience. But there were all those people saying that this is way too much money. But then Gmail in 2003 or 2004 said, we are going to have a robot read through all your emails. You'll get a gigabyte of storage and 25 megabyte attachments. All you have to do is let us read through all your shit. And people said, sure. So I think that tech companies and business owners said, $15 for an album from a really awesome artist that cost $300,000 to produce is too much from a very talented person. But he'll let us read through all of our shit for like 25 megabyte attachments? Wow. We got access to all of your personal shit in exchange for a gigabyte of storage? Damn. And I think that sent a signal to the market that let them know that we have a very high value on our money. We do not want to spend our money on shit, but we will definitely give up every single piece of privacy. And you're only starting to see the ripple effects of that 22 years later, when you have like Spotify patenting the ability to listen to what's going on in your environment and use it to read your emotions, and like your data getting sold from your car to insurance companies and them using that data to raise your rates and all the weird stuff that we deal with now. But I think we'd have a much healthier market if instead of ads, people paid for things. And even if it was just a fraction of a cent here or there.
Exactly. I think the cost to building the infrastructure to begin with is so massive. And not only building the infrastructure, I think the knowledge of how to do this from a technical side is already there. The only thing missing is that people are not used to it. So how are you going to transition into that system if you need everyone to simultaneously accept and be able to pay with it? So maybe a different way of doing it would be with, I think YouTube has already offered this for members. So there's subscribers and there's members, people who pay. And those people can also get videos in advance or videos without ads because they're already paying for it. But I think an analogous problem has happened with emails, that because there's no friction to emails, sending them, you can spam them, and that if the cost of replication goes far enough, spam will emerge. This has happened with everything. Even in this magazine, we get sent thousands of books because the cost of replication is so low, and a lot of them are good, but the problem is that the cost is so small and the sending is so cheap that they do it a lot. So we end up with thousands of books here that we don't need. We literally cannot, we don't have the time to read all of them. And the same thing happens with your email inbox. It's that you read mine is already a miracle, and that we're now here sitting is kind of a miracle because there's zero cost. But if I could have paid $1 to appear in the top of your mailbox, I would have been willing to do it because I judge my email as a legitimate one. But the spammer sending that to 1 million people wouldn't be willing to pay $1 for sending the email.
Yeah, that would be cool if there was a way for somebody to do that. But I also imagine that there's like ways to game it or ways for somebody. But it would still be better than the system you have now.
It's kind of like proof of work.
We're talking about the people sending you AI-generated articles and books you're supposed to read. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah. I get a lot of emails from people that are AI generated, and I feel like such a dick when I point it out. It's kind of like pointing out that somebody's fly is down, but they get way angrier. Where you see the M dash, and it's not just this. It's XYZ with ABC. It's like, not this, not that. This thing, there's a certain rhythm and cadence to it. It just lets me know 100%. And when I point it, they go, I was just using it to organize my thoughts. Like, get the fuck out of here. You hit Control-C and Control-V. And I'll just say every time, if you didn't write this, why the fuck should I read it? Like, if you didn't write it, why am I going to read it? I just don't read them. But people get so angry. And even though it said on YouTube right next to the contact, if you generate this with AI, I will not read it and potentially screenshot it and post it to shame you. Because I don't want to read stuff that somebody didn't write. It's just so annoying to me. At the very least, edit the shit that it wrote for you. Or just make the mild, just edit out the M dashes or something. Just like the stupid cadence. I want to talk to a person.
But to be fair, before AI generated content already even existed, my girlfriend Fabian used to use M dashes on her own. So I think that there's a legitimate use of M dashes, and I was amazed when she said, "No, I actually use this on a regular basis, even before ChatGPT."
I asked somebody in a job interview. I said, "Okay, like what key do you hit in the keyboard to make it M dash?" This is where it was a very obviously AI generated cover letter and everything. It was 100%. It was very obvious. I'm like, what key do you use? Hit that, and she just stares at me, and I'm like, "It's okay.
Search it and copy
It's
it.
okay."
Yeah, so true. But there has to be, circling back the whole topic, there has to be a way of making cost and benefit aligned or circular. The externalities you create by sending spam has to be in some way internalized by, if you're going to spend time reading your emails, you also have to spend something, because my time is not worth nothing, right? So pay something now, and so you will justify me spending my time going through it. Or if you want to spam me to death, then I will do the same thing on the other side. I'll have my AI agent read my emails and read whatever your AI agent said. So AI agent versus AI agent, but now their genuine signals are flooded. Because if someone writes an email with their own hands, how is that going to be recognized in a sea of AI-generated things? It's maybe that person could use the AI to leverage whatever real signal there is there, and that would be kind of a solution. But I'm not entirely sure how this is going to develop.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna find out.
Waiting.
I think a big problem that you also have is it makes people very lazy, right? So in the industry where I used to work, you know, the whole point, like it's in consulting, so the whole point is that the people at the top have the knowledge. The people underneath, we just like create the decks based on the knowledge that the top people have. But now the people at the top were just plugging everything into ChatGPT, so they're not even using the only like unique thing that they had to begin with. It's literally like enshittification, but then
Cognitively.
yes.
No, but that's no worries. That's no problem, because if they enshittify their thinking and they end up sending emails and giving the mandates to their workers that are shit, then that will be seen in the profit and in the cost-benefit analysis at the end of the year. The income statement won't lie. If you're producing some shit, people will stop buying if they have an alternative, and that will be seen. So I'm not too worried about the AI slop conquering everything, as long as there's some sense of alternative to the people.
Yeah.
As long as alternatives are had, the system will correct itself.
Hopefully.
That's I think, a very optimistic way of ending it.
Oh, pleasure meeting you, sir.
Absolute pleasure.